And welcome. We are so glad that you decided to spend your morning with us. I'm Stacy Daniel, and I serve as the section chief for ELA and languages. Today, you're joining us for the Unpacking session on unpacking the ELD standards. And during this session, we hope that you're going to have some time to explore, engage in activities that are really designed for you to develop a really good understanding of the ELD standards and the language expectations. And you'll also be contributing to an artifact to help you with your implementation of the standards come fall of 2022. So your presenters today are Karen Solis and Laura Van Camp, who are members of our support team. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them to begin and facilitate the session. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Stacy, and good morning to everyone on this beautiful June morning. Thank you for taking your time to be with us today in the summertime, and we hope that you'll enjoy the session. I'm Laura Van Camp, and I just want to welcome you today to our unpacking of the 2022 ELD standards.
Hi, and I'm Karen Solis. I teach middle school multilinguals in Gaston County and have been on the support team since 2010. So happy to be here and be with you today on the first day of summer.
Yes, and just a little about me. I'm the lead ESL teacher in Rutherford County, and I just finished my 17th year with that and love it. I serve 4 schools ranging from elementary to high school, and I've been on the team since 2016. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. All right, and just to catch one thing on the last slide, the Twitter handle that we're using this year is NCMLs 2022. And you can feel free to tweet out the things that you're learning and excited about. Of course, we've changed from ELs to MLs for the multilingual learners. We've kind of updated that. And if you would like, please tweet out with this hashtag. And now on to our WebEx overview. For those that don't use WebEx on a regular basis, this is just a little snapshot of the things to look out for and familiarize yourself while we go through our conference this week. Here's a few of the features. In the lower left corner, you can see the meeting details. In the middle, you can see the meeting controls, where you'll find that you can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. You can put your hand up and we'll call on you, and you can unmute and speak to everyone during that time. And you'll have an option to unmute during our discussion activities in breakout rooms. Otherwise, make sure that your microphone is muted just so that we don't have any background noise and everybody can focus on the presentation. You know how that happens a lot of times. I think most of us are, since COVID, are a little bit more familiar with that kind of thing. Also, you can change your video layout and your view to customize that as you like. And hopefully this will allow you to feel more comfortable in participating, because we really want you to feel like you can participate actively and gain all that you can from today's training. Next, we'd like to invite you to join the conference notebook option that you've got. This is really great for this year, and it's new. If you started the conference yesterday, you've probably already started your conference notebook. If today's your first time, you can click on the link that best fits your role with multilingual learners. Just click on the link and you can make your own copy. You'll want to use that to be participating in with the session today. And what you might want to do is open that up and as a new page or as a new tab, or you might want to use it on another device so that you can toggle back and forth between the slide presentation and your artifact notebook. The slide presentation URL is at the bottom of the screen where it says tinyurl.com /Unpacking ELD. So make sure you've got your slides up and your conference notebook on two different tabs or two different devices. Later on in the presentation, that will be essential as we are working on our artifact together. So I just wanted to encourage you to do that as we go along. All right, Karen, did you have anything to add to that before I move on?
No, not a bit. That's good.
Okay, great.
Because
All right.
they need to have that up to be able to complete their artifact.
Okay,
Good.
very good. Okay, and so our poll today, this is a lot of fun. We're going to have a poll right now where you're just going to check your pulse with how familiar you are with the new ELD standards framework. So this is our range right here from 0 to 5, from being completely new to you, that's a 0, to I eat, sleep, and breathe this standards framework. That is the 5, and everything in between. So right now, you're going to see the poll open up on your screen. And if you'll click next to the number that best describes you, in just a minute, we are going to see what the results are of that. So just click next to it and click submit.
Just as an update, we've got a couple more people who are still completing the poll, and we're going to close it soon.
Is there a way for you to turn off the chat when you do this? Like when it says submit, the chat keeps popping up and like you can't hit the submit button.
I believe you should be able to close that panel. If you look at the panel that says polling, to the right, there's an X. If you X out of that panel, it should open up where you can see your chat again.
Or vice versa. If you want to be able to complete the poll, just X the chat for temporarily, and so that you can submit the poll, and then you can pull open the chat again.
You know, you guys are really wonderful. You're really helping me out.
Thank you.
Message I'm getting is that the poll has ended. Are you able to open it back up?
No, so the poll is now closed. So if you haven't responded to the poll, just go ahead and put your number in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our results, it looks like we've got the most are 2s, which is, I've looked at it, but I haven't dug into it. That's 33%. And then for 26% said that there are 3, I'm familiar with it. Okay, that's good. And then we've got, let's see, that is 5, is 3%. 8% is a 1, which is, I've heard it's coming. 6% is a 0, completely new to me. So it looks like if we added up our greatest percentages, we've got 59% that have some familiarity with it. That's good. Well, after today, I think you're really going to feel more confident in understanding the unpacking document. And I think it's going to really help all of us to be able to implement the new standards next year.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on and let's touch base with our objectives and where we want to go today. I would like to add, if you're just joining us a couple minutes late, I've added a QR code up in the top right corner that will lead you to this presentation. If you want to scan it with your phone or another device, you can do it that way, or you can access it with a tiny URL at the bottom of the screen in the bottom right along the blue bar. So our first objective today is to become acquainted with the purpose, format, contents, and location of the ELD unpacking documents. But we also want to provide ideas for how to use this resource in support and implementation of these new adopted expectations. Additionally, we're going to have a chance to reflect on our own practices, check out some research-based standards aligned practices, and then finally, an important part of this session will be that you will be creating an artifact that will promote future application of this material. And again, you can just scan that QR code if that makes it easy for you, or go to the tiny URL. Okay, so our first objective is to get acquainted with the purpose, format, contents, and location of the ELD unpacking document. So on March 4th of 2021, the State Board of Education unanimously approved this edition of the WIDA English Language Development Standards. To successfully implement these standards, NCDPI has created the unpacking documents to deepen the understanding of the standards and show how content and language can be learned together. So the purpose of these documents is to increase student achievement by providing access to rich, standard-based grade level content by ensuring all educators have a clear understanding of the expectations of the adopted standards, which we hope to achieve today. The unpacking documents include the ELD standards as well as clarifications, unpacked language functions, in the classroom ideas, and a sample language objective for each bullet within the language expectation. The clarifications appear in the order of the bullet points within the language expectations. Please note that in the language or in the classroom ideas, the unpacked language functions and the sample language objectives, they are not meant to be exhaustive list or meant to reflect the summative assessment items. First, let's set the stage. We still have our 5 standards: the social instructional language, language of language arts, language of math, language of science, and language of social studies that we focus on for English language development. Our language expectations are our goals for content-driven language learning. So let's unpack the format. The ELD standard for English language development, LA here refers to the language of language arts. The grade span is K8, and the key language use is narrative. Then the mode is interpretive, and we'll go into that more in depth later. And also there are the key language uses that are embedded in our standards. Each of these are critical to the developing our students' ability to communicate effectively in English. To locate this resource, you can always Google NCDPI ELD Resource Hub, but you also may want to bookmark this and add it to your conference notebook. In the center of the Resource Hub, you will find the unpacking icon for this resource. Laura, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. So now we're going to take a tour of the unpacking document and look at how it's formatted. And so if you'll look with me at the very top, it's outlined in bright yellow. This is telling us that we're looking at the ELD Standard 4, which is the language of science. And below that, you're going to see a box that is bordered in teal. This is the language expectation. So I'm going to go a little bit slower on this so that we kind of internalize the different names for the different boxes and information within this standard. This is going to kind of help us to understand how the unpacking is laid out and how we can use it. All right, so the language expectation at the top, if you'll look at the bolded area, it says ELD, which stands for English Language Development. SC stands for science. K is for kindergarten. Inform is for the key language use of inform. And interpretive is the mode of communication. So all of that is just packed really tightly right there. And as you get used to looking at the standards, that'll be something you'll just breeze over and understand where we're at. And then the expectation is interpret scientific informational text by. Now, those two bullets there will be clarified a little bit further. If you look under the skills heading, the first clarification is listed there, and then it's unpacked language functions of that bullet. And then directly below that, you'll see the other clarification, and it's unpacked language functions. So it's just breaking this down, breaking it apart so that it's easier to understand exactly what we need to do in our instruction. And then if you look to the right, the heading says in the classroom. Here are some ideas of classroom scenarios of how this could look in a classroom if you were to open the door to a classroom and see how this teacher is applying it to her particular or his particular context. All right. So this is an idea that the writers came up with how you could apply it. Of course, you could apply it in a myriad of ways, but in this particular example, the teacher's looking at a science informational text and looking at the coverings of animals, because that definitely meshes with the kindergarten science standards. So that's why they use that example. And then in the purple box, you'll see a sample language objective. So this is an objective you could use if you wanted to do something about animal coverings. Of course, you can change this as you change out your content. So the content is science. Our ELD standard is to interpret these kind of texts. So I hope maybe that's a little more clear as far as what the format is. I just want to look and see if that I've covered everything on that. Yes, so these are just samples, and I just wanted to make that really clear. And these are aligned to our kindergarten content standards as well as our ELD standards for kindergarten. All right, anything I need to add to that, Karen? Please jump in. Oh, you're not mute. You're muted. All right.
No, I think that I love the adaptations. Yes, we're going to adapt these for various topics and standards and modify them to meet the needs. Good one, Daniel.
All right. Thanks. And thank you for adding into the chat and communicating with us there and joining in. That's great. All right. So the next thing we're going to look at is the first strategy that we're going to introduce to you to unpack the standards. So this is called Number the Skills. And it's really kind of a really basic strategy, but it's extremely helpful when you're looking at a standard that looks really complex. And this is a good way to sort of break it down into bite-sized pieces, because we know that brain research tells us that we've got to do that. In order for us to really internalize something, you've got to break it down into those pieces. So if you look at the top, we have under the language expectation, as I said on the previous slide, you're going to look at that standard that you plan to teach and read its clarification. So of course, right here, we've got the ELD science standard, and we might want to highlight that. So it's going to come up in blue. Yes. We know this is for second and third grade. All right. And then for explain and expressive, this is our key use and our mode of communication. All right, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and I'm going to highlight and number our skills. Okay, so the first skill I want to look at is to construct scientific explanations. So when we think about expressive things, this is what our students are going to produce. So we've already done some teaching, some direct instruction with the students about a text, and now they're going to construct a scientific explanation. All right, and then the next skill is to describe these observations. All right, so in some way, we're going to think about how the kids or how the students can describe what they've observed. And our third skill is to describe the data about a phenomenon. So to kind of digest all of that, you may have to read this over, several times. I know that's what I've had to do. So, number one, we're constructing a scientific explanation. Number two, we are describing some observations. So we know that in the lesson, we're going to have them observe something. And number three, they're going to have to record some data about a phenomenon. Well, to understand a phenomenon, we might have to look that up in the dictionary so that we know what a phenomenon is. It's something that happens, right? And so we know we're in the science standard. So you kind of have to get your science content hat on to think about this as a scientist, right? So then you see under skills, the students are going to describe that data from the observations about a phenomenon. Our unpack language functions are there as well to specifically tell us we're going to do this, this, and this, describing those terms and what observations are and phenomena. Probably you've already done this in your instruction because this is an expressive piece. So either they're going to speak out what we're going to do or they're going to be writing something down. All right. And then to the right, you're going to look at that in the classroom scenario. And so in this particular standard, they're going to have the students explore sound. So they must be working with sound with a partner by taking turns and charting whether a vocal sound is high or low, which is a pitch, or loud or soft, which is volume. All right, so we knew going back up to the skills, this is going to be describing observations and data. So that's probably taking some data. Then the students use sound vocabulary to explain to their partner that sound waves are collected by the outer ear, they vibrate in the eardrum, and they cause the tiny bones in the middle ear to vibrate and then move through the bones in the inner ear where sounds are understood by the brain. So that is really some great information that the students are going to be describing. So number two of our skills is to describe. That's a thorough explanation. So this is great. And they're definitely working on this to hit all of those points. And then the students may draw a labeled diagram. So here's more data that the students are capturing, a labeled diagram of the ear. All right. So from that, we're going to look at that sample language objective. This really captures all of this beautifully. Students will be able to describe data from observations about a phenomenon. Okay, so our phenomenon is how we hear. All right, by charting pitch and volume of vocal sounds, drawing a label diagram of the ear, as well as explaining to their partners how the sound moves through the ear and is understood by the brain. So I think this teacher has really thought through this very well. The teacher has already identified through numbering those skills how they're going to um, do this in a lesson or in a unit, and they're measuring the mastery of what it would look like when the students are able to accomplish this goal. So I wanted to take that very slow so that we can begin with the end in mind. Those of you that are that observe the 7 habits, you'll know what that means. And we want to look at it in total and see what it is that we need to do to break that down to get to the end, to our end goal.
So Laura, we have a question in the chat. So from Diana, she
Okay.
said, so with this format, there's not a need to break those language objectives up rather than writing it as a three-pronged objective.
I see what you mean. Yes, so you're going to be incorporating all of those pieces into your language objective. And for me, while I was working on some of these documents, what I would have to do is think to myself, how can students explain a scientific text and describe their observations and just explain the data that they're going to share? How can I do that? And then I would think about a scenario that lined up with the content of science for that grade level, and then develop that objective from that. So it's kind of like everything works together. It's all working together to accomplish that goal.
And I know those 30-minute, if it's like when I was in elementary, those 30-minute lessons, you couldn't maybe meet all of that objective. So you might have to break parts of that up over time when you're meeting with the students and interruptions occur and everything. But to have that as part of your overall language objective for that lesson,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah. Yes, and yes, as Stacy said, we will go over writing sample, uh, over how to write those sample language objectives in the mapping session. So we encourage you to attend that. David, you're right. The phenomenon could be called condensation, which is moisture in the air. It condenses and it appears when it cools. So, he is differentiating that to show you a good example of, this could be a different classroom scenario. Thank you, David, for helping us. Um, exactly. So he's kind of converting that over to a different phenomenon, and I'm sure that since all of your ESL teachers are involved with our multilingual learners very closely, in your brain you're probably seeing all kinds of ideas that are exploding for how this can work. All right, so we're going to do a your turn on this particular strategy. So first off, you're going to read, this is a different ELD language expectation. First, you're going to read the standard, the skills, the classroom scenario, and the objective. So you can even write notes for this in your conference notebook. So if you've got that on another tab or another device, I'm going to give you some time to read this to yourself. And I want you to read through this standard, read through all of the different pieces, the standard, the clarification, the skills, the classroom scenario, and the language objective. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read through that right now.
Laura, you're muted.
I am so sorry. Thank you, Stacy. So you're going to, hopefully you've had enough time to read through the language expectation. So this is a social studies standard for first grade. Our key language use is to argue. So we want students to argue the pros and cons of something. And it's interpretive, so they're taking in information. That gives us a lot of information as a backdrop. All right. Um, Now, as you read through the skills and the classroom ideas, the second thing that you're going to do is highlight, just like we did on the last one, highlight what skills you see under the language expectation and how many skills should be taught. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a few seconds to think about that. You can list, you can circle, you can highlight, you can underline, whatever, jot down on a sticky note, whatever it is that you think are the skills that need to be taught here. And I'll give you a few seconds to identify that. As you identify it, please feel free to drop that in the chat. Thank you, Wendy. You're right. And it is to interpret social studies arguments, to identify the topic, to interpret and argue. Yes. All right. So that might seem kind of basic, but that's enormous. When you're looking at if you're looking at the content for first grade in this particular content area, social studies. So you got to get your social studies hat on. You've got to get your argue hat on. All right. So this is multifaceted, but that's okay because we teach ESL. So we know how to do this. And I know we just have to get that, calibrate our minds to what we're doing here. And that's what I had to do continually as I was writing some of these classroom scenarios and trying to think through this. All right. And so you've got that part. You know what the skills are now. You've got that. Number 3, figure out how you want to determine mastery or measure student understanding for these skills. So how are we going to know that they've interpreted? How are we going to know that they've identified a topic? Let's think about that for just a minute. How can we do that? Drop your ideas in the chat.
Also, I see up here, yes, it's going to be important to teach the students, especially these first graders, what argue means, as David says
Yes.
pointed out. I think a good word also to use is debate. We're going to debate an issue. So yes.
And they do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they do that, but maybe they don't know that word, but they're negotiating continually. They're arguing for whatever it is that they're passionate about. I know because I have a 7-year-old. I know how this happens. So they create a title that identifies the argument. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yes.
So many good things in the chat. Absolutely. So this particular classroom situation, what they did was they thought of something that's relevant. Right now, gas prices are relevant, and how panic buying creates scarcity. Think about in 2020, COVID, toilet tissue, all of that. When everybody's panicked about something running out, they're going to be running to those gas stations. So they use that particular topic, which is great. And this is a great way to get students thinking about pros and cons, arguing different topics. And so in this discussion with the students, they're going to be recording what it is that they're thinking, and they're identifying that topic. They're writing a title with the generalized nouns in the small groups, and they're supported by a visual. So they have a picture of this particular scenario, a picture of cars in long lines waiting for the pump at the gas station, and they're going through a see, think, and wonder routine. If you don't exactly know what that is, you can Google those. Most of those are you're able to understand that. But we've all seen KWLs and things that are of a similar nature. So I think this standard shows how you can take a topic and help the students interpret it and be able to argue their case for that. All right, and I'm just reading through the chat, and I think that there's some great ideas in here that we want to do this orally. And yes, you're right. For an interpretive standard, you are going to be using a lot of oral arguments. Yes, and I like how someone's using a sentence frame. I agree with what blank said, because blank and, be able to explain. You guys are professionals. You guys are the experts. And I see that I've got a hand raised for Myron. You want to speak out an idea?
Yes, I was wondering on when we talk about the sample language objectives, those are for students, right? So students are going to read those, correct?
Right. So those are our I can statements, or however it is that you phrase those exactly.
Okay. And how are we do we, I guess, and this might be a question for the mapping session, but um, I was taught to put the language function in the language that they're actually going to be using, whether it be at the sentence, discourse, or the sentence or discourse level, and like some of the words that they're going to be using, so that we can make that really salient for students. So I was wondering, I just didn't see that here, and I was wondering if that was going to be covered in the mapping session, or what you guys' thoughts were on that.
Are you
Yeah.
talking about putting in a word bank or including a word bank for the students?
No, I'm more talking about like students will be able to identify the topic of a social studies standard. So like giving them, by writing sentences to communicate their identification, and then this, I might just need to go to the mapping session.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a message from Stacy that they're going to cover that in the mapping session. Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
That's awesome, though. I mean, I think that's a very detailed, amazing way to do it. These were just kind of using all of the information here, where we're going to, all those skills that we identified, we're going to make sure that those are in the objectives so that it matches. And we're actually getting to our goal with our objective. Thank you so much.
Laura, can I piggyback on something you were just
Please.
saying earlier? Because I'm seeing something in the chat that I just want to make sure I address. With the sample language objectives, remember, one, these are a starting point, right? And this is not something that you have to use. These are things that you can use to help you and guide your thinking. And of course, you can adapt them, because you've got to adapt them to your students, because no one knows your students better than you do. That's number one. Number two, keep in mind there's a difference between language objectives and success criteria. So that language objective, of course, you should be using the language of the standard and the language expectations, because that's what's expected of them by the end of their grade level cluster. And then use that success criteria for each of your lessons or for each of your units to really break down that language objective in terms of how they're going to achieve that objective. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. And we are going to look at another strategy. This happens to be one of my favorites, and this is called the best fit. And what I want to do is I'm going to read this aloud, and then I'm going to ask you to think about what you notice and what you wonder. This is a very surface level um, observation right now. So just think to yourself, what do you notice about what you're hearing? So I'm going to read this one aloud. What do you notice and what do you wonder? You can definitely share it in just a minute. We'll share it out. Okay. All right. So we're ELD for social studies, grades 4 to 5. Explain, interpretive. Interpret social studies explanations by determining different opinions and sources for answering compelling and supporting questions about phenomena or events. All right, so that is our focus. Under skills, we have a clarification. Students identify various opinions expressed in a variety of sources for answering compelling and supporting questions about phenomena or events. All right, so our functions are to define terms, determine different opinions and sources, determine um, the different opinions for answering supporting questions. All right. In the classroom, okay, so this is how this could look. Students listen to a read aloud of 3 different sources regarding the decline of the furniture industry in North Carolina. Number 1, a newspaper article on furniture plant closings. Number 2, this is another source, a letter to the editor from an unemployed furniture worker. Number 3, another source, an online interview with a legislator serving the area with closed down furniture plants. Students listen in order to answer the compelling question: what factors led to the decline of the furniture industry in North Carolina? The teacher guides the class in identifying the opinion in the newspaper article, using the document camera, and highlighting while thinking aloud. Students form small groups to identify opinions in either the letter to the editor or the online interview, highlighting sentences that support opinions and referring to the anchor chart as needed. So that's a lot to think about. So just tell me, what did you notice and what did you wonder? If you want to speak, raise your hand and Stacy will let you speak out. You can also drop your ideas in the chat. All right, so I see they can successfully identify the social studies topic and write the corresponding title to go with it. Thank you, Cindy. Jaime is saying see, think, wonder. All right, Jennifer's saying create a title that identifies the argument. Wait a minute. This must be some comments from before. I'm sorry. Let me scroll down.
Heather said, I wonder how long an ESL teacher would take in their classroom to address this one standard. I agree. It's a lot to unpack, and in 30 minutes, it just would not be under normal circumstances. But that's okay, because sometimes our lessons extend further than that one segment of time. Naomi said also she's wondering the teacher dividing the students into 3 groups, or all students were looking at all 3 articles, sort of like a jigsaw. That's a great idea. And Maria said, I noticed real life examples of sources. I love that. Me too, Maria. Sierra commented, students need to understand what an opinion is. Do they already have this knowledge? And that's true, because we get our multilinguals come in at all different ages and grades. So we need to make sure that they have that background knowledge.
That's right. Thank you, Karen. And I see that Jaime is saying, I notice the language demands are high, and I wonder that the scaffolds are needed to support MLs through it. Absolutely. we're going to have to think about our proficiency level of our students. And that's what all of us do so well and almost effortlessly. And thank you for bringing that out. Exactly. All right, so let's move on to the next part of this strategy. Now that we've kind of got swimming in this water a little bit, number one, what I want you to do is look deeply at the in the classroom idea. I want you to take a moment to read through the standard again and that classroom scenario. Okay. Now, think about this. We're looking at different sources to find an opinion. That's the bottom line. All right. So now I want you to think about this in a different way. How would this particular classroom scenario fit in your lesson or in your unit? Would it be the introduction? Would it be direct instruction or modeling, that type of piece? Or would it be in the guided practice or the independent practice or the closure? So this particular scenario that you're seeing on your screen right here, if you were going to use this in your lesson, where would it fit? If you'll just put that into the chat or raise your hand and you'll be able to unmute.
And Lanny has commented, this is grade level content. Yes. Notice the support's already present. Listen to a read aloud, small group work, teacher modeling. Awesome. Modeling and guided practice are predominant, said Gloram. And I like the activity addresses, reading, viewing, listening domains, which can support students with different proficiency levels. Thank you, Karen. Got guided practice, yes, and modeling. Cindy said, I think it would need to be a mixture between guided practice and independent practice and closure. Yes.
These are great ideas. Thank you so much. And keep putting them in there because it helps all of us to share our ideas and what it could possibly be. You could do so many things with this. As you said, there is a lot of guided practice in here. And so you can think to yourself, number 3, what instruction might need to happen before or after it? So let's put that hat on. Let's think about, if this is guided practice, what needs to be happening to introduce it, or what needs to happen after this piece? What are your ideas?
First, I'd like to go back real quick to the one comment that I saw that I just loved. Gwen teaches in high school, but here she is looking in this and saying that she could use it in introduction to the topic of the NC economy. So I'd like to encourage you, because we did that a lot, looking at these. For more ideas in social studies or science, you can go and look at the alignment documents for the different grade spans and see how it progresses and get even more ideas. So thank you, Gwen.
Okay. So someone said that you may need to understand, the students might need to understand what an opinion is before they can identify one. Also, you would need to front load some vocabulary. Thank you, Sierra. A lot of great ideas here. Well, we have so much to share with you that we're going to have to move on. And thank you for your thoughts and ideas. This is awesome. All right. So now it's your turn to determine the best fit. I'm giving you a different standard now, and I want you to look again at the classroom idea and determine where it fits. Introduction, direct instruction or modeling, guided practice, independent practice, or closure. Okay, so let's look at this together. I'm going to give you some time, just a few seconds to read through that and start giving me your thoughts in the chat about where it fits.
Great ideas.
Wonderful. So thank you. A lot of independent, um, some are even saying closure. Absolutely. This you can turn this into what it needs to be, depending on your grade level, depending on your proficiency of your students, depending on your context. And someone brought up, how does a ESL teacher do this in 30 minutes? Well, we do it the way that we need to, depending on all of those different factors. And sometimes we have to simplify things, or sometimes it has to go over different sessions over time. And it's always different for each context. All right. So, what do you think? Once you've determined where it fits, think about that instruction that would need to happen before and or after this idea is used. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, I think they would need to know how to generate questions, and I might even just do it about an everyday topic before to get to kind of draw that skill out and then say, hey, now that we've done it in the world of Bix, let's put the academic hat on.
All right. I always use the term ratcheting. I take an idea and I ratchet it up or down depending on proficiency, layering like you're talking about. You're going to weave in that academic vocabulary now. Maybe you're going to be weaving in some different strategies and things like that. And I think that's what is so amazing about ESL teachers is the ability to do that and do it so beautifully. And please keep sharing these ideas. Um, I see some folks are even sharing some documents and everything. Um, thank you so much. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next piece of the presentation.
Okay, and next we're going to be looking at we're going to be looking at modes of communication. So within each standard, there are both interpretive and expressive modes of communication, and they're noted in the standard after the language function. The interpretive is a receptive mode, it's the listening, the reading, and now has been added viewing. And with the expressive mode, it is the productive mode, the speaking, writing, and representing, as it has been added. So in these examples here from a standard 4 language for science, that this again is a kindergarten example. So they're going to inform and do an interpretive language function for scientific informational texts. And then you see in the following example that they have that same inform, and then it's an expressive, so they're going to be actually doing or producing, speaking, writing for their performance of the language to show that they can do this. The following two examples, you've got an explain, and they're going to have that interpretive mode again, where they are listening, reading, or viewing those scientific explanations by defining investigable questions or simple design problems based on observations and data. And then further down, we've got that kindergarten example for explain with expressive language again, which is the production, where they're going to construct scientific explanations that describe, relate, or compare. So on the next slide, with that strategy in mind, looking at this interpret and expressive side by side, we're now looking at a grades 4 and 5 where we have the language function to argue and the interpretive language arts arguments by. And what do you notice? What kinds of verbs are used in these interpretive objectives? Take a moment, look at that, and you can put in the chat. All right, we've got identify and analyze and evaluate. Let's look over to that expressive side and compare. What verbs are used in the expressive language standards? Right, good job. Okay, we've got construct, introduce, support, use, logically. And how are these similar? In the interpretive and the expressive language objectives, how are these verbs similar? Right, I'm thinking blooms. Mm-hmm. They have higher order thinking skills. And like Heather said, the students are actively involved. The expressive verbs, yes, Shannon, support the interpretive verbs. And Jesse said the interpretive, the students are identifying, analyzing, and evaluating to think deeply about the process. And then in expressive, they are using those skills to construct their own products. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. And it's your turn. What kinds of verbs are used in the interpretive objectives? And what kinds of verbs are used in the expressive objectives? Let's look at the interpretive first. This is a language arts for grades 4-5 argue example where it states that they interpret language arts arguments by. Right? We start with identify, don't we? That's easier to do, but you still have to think through it and be able to do that. And then with the expressive objectives, introduce, describe, and state, right? It gets, and then introduce, support, use, connect, right? Exactly. So that students are really building their knowledge and they're applying and they're moving from that understanding to expressing through those modes of communication. Okay, we'll move on to the next. Oh, wait, let's see. Yes. How are they similar and how are they different? It's awesome to see how we're still in that same objective, but we're internalizing and then we're producing as well. So let's move on to that next slide. And we're going to be unpacking our next objective. And here is that QR code that some of you have been asking for if you want to scan it with your phone and be able to access it on another device. So we're going to create an artifact that will promote future application of this material. So what you're going to do is in breakout rooms, you're going to get to choose a grade span of your choice. And then you're going to join a breakout room for that grade cluster. You will also have others join you that have that same interest so that we want you to have something that's authentic and meaningful. So together you're going to, as a group, use one of the strategies that we've talked about for unpacking that we've shared and unpack your language expectation. So what that is going to look like on the next slide is in your, first of all, you can go to, when you click on a suitcase, it will take you to a Google Doc or a Google slide presentation where you will number your, or add your names to the document. And then you're going to get to choose which chosen language expectation you want to do for that grade level. And then you're going to put your notes on the page of how you would unpack that language expectation with your number the skills or your best fit, looking at the classroom scenario, where does it fit in the lesson? Or strategy 3 was the interpretive expressive objectives. You can also note where that would fit in that scheme of your lesson design. So there will be approximately 4 people per group. We're going to give you about 15 minutes for this. So that if you do need, we've been sitting for a while, if you need to run and use the restroom or something, meet with your group, decide what your objective is, take care of personal needs. But any questions before you go first?
Yes, when I click on the suitcase in the participant version of the nothing, wait, I have under my Unpacking 22 conference participants, 22. When I click on the suitcase, nothing happens. It's just a picture.
It should bring you to one of these documents. But if it doesn't, once we put you in a breakout room, we'll make sure that your group has access to that slide deck. So that way you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and open up breakout sessions. They are now open, so go ahead and choose the grade band that you'd like to work in. Just keep in mind, if we end up with like 10 people in one breakout room, we may end up moving you. So try to keep them to 4-ish people like Karen was just mentioning. Should be back.
Laura, if you are here, could you unmute?
It seems that she's talking, but she's muted.
Laura. Okay, as everyone's coming back, and we will go ahead and get started with unpacking what you were able to do in your breakout rooms. I saw a lot of wonderful activity going on, and a lot of discussion. It appeared that a lot of you were, I love the way that you had the highlighters going and you were unpacking different parts of the language expectations. And so as you look at this, with this implementation piece, feel free to unmute or type in the chat box some wows and wonders that some of the strategies that you could use or plan to use with this? What did you discover?
So I'll start by saying my wow is that um, everybody who has worked on this project for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you, because this is starting to look like what other content standards have, and what other unpacking documents for other content areas have looked like, and it's a very concise way to do this. I'm recently out of a teacher training program, and they gave us some strategies to unpack standards, but it was just like for a generalist and not specific to our field. And so I really, really um, want to just say a big, huge thank you. One thing that I'm still wondering is, like, should I go and start um, uh, and directly look at this unpacking document during planning, or like where does this fit into my to what I to what I already do, and when should I consult it, at what stage of the planning process, I guess.
Well, as depending on what district you're in and what curriculum you follow, you want to always refer to your standards first, because your standards are what is supposed to guide your instruction, and see how you can um, correlate all of it to work together so that your lessons will be stem from your objectives, your standard course of study objectives from the state.
Oh, I found what the problem was.
Okay, you got
Yes.
your back, Laura.
Hold on. Can you hear me now, Karen?
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, that was my Bluetooth that acted up.
No, that's good. They're sharing. And I'm sorry, I don't know who just made that comment. Was it Myron? About when to use this unpacking document when he's planning his lessons. And I said, you've got to use your whatever curriculum your district is uh, determining that you must use. But at the same time, you always look to your state standards, because that is your framework for making sure that you teach um, or what you teach to your students.
Yes, I'm seeing Jesse's talking about collaboration. That's the
Mhm.
power of this. And hopefully, you can connect with folks in this training and other trainings this week and be able to collaborate together as well. I'm not sure what you were saying, Karen. So have we covered the wows and wonders?
So we're just starting to get into that.
Okay.
So they're sharing whether it was in working with others in the unpacking in their Google Doc. If they want to, make sure you copy whatever you created for your artifact into your the notebook, your conference notebook, because that is a compilation of all of your sessions, so that if you have to submit that um, you to your district for CEUs or whatever, you'll want to have that noted in there. Or you can put the link into that. We'll be using that all week as we unpack for different target audiences to be able to do this same breakout activity that you've just done, to really help internalize reading those standards, thinking about them, applying them. So this fall, as you're diving back in and creating your lessons, you'll already be so much further ahead with all of this. And
Yes.
it looks like a comment was made. We also thought about students' language levels when deciding our language expectations. You have to, right? To build those scaffolds effectively, to have successful lessons, got to think about those proficiency levels. And I love that, to collaborate with Gen Ed. And Gwen, I did too. I love the examples so that you can actually take out your topic. Maybe you're doing the butterfly life cycle, and maybe you're going to go do the frog next, and you can just take out. You've got that scenario, you've got that example, and then you can just use it like a recipe and switch out different parts. Good point. All right.
Okay. Now what we would like to do, and keep putting your ideas in the chat because everyone can read those and gain more. We're going to move on to the connections to our North Carolina multilingual initiatives. And we're going to share with you some best practices strategies. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
All right. So, no matter what the first language is, best practices begin with Stephen Krashen's low affective filter. That is creating that low anxiety learning environment. So when you're not in fight or flight mode, the body can be receptive to learning and they can just take everything in. When our multilinguals come into a new school, there are many phases that they go through. Initially, there may be that honeymoon period where everything is new and exciting. However, they may end up in culture shock or exhausted as the classroom environment is either not quite the same where they're from, or just listening day after day and not understanding can be exhausting when you're learning a new language. There's also an adjustment period. However, with that warm, welcoming environment, appropriate scaffolding, and other supports, the student will adapt. And just being able to be successful is so important. There is much to read on this. One of my personal favorite resources is linked here for you, the OELA's EL Toolkit. Again, just wanted to give you lots of resources in this presentation that you can go back and delve deeper into as you have the time. And next we have
the OCDE Project GLAD strategies, and I have the privilege of being one of the GLAD trainers in North Carolina. OCDE stands for Orange County Department of Education in California, and Project GLAD has a lot of over 150 strategies that help with different strategies and how you can use these in your classroom ideas. Just wanted to point out two strategies that are near to my heart. First, on the left, these are called learning logs, and these are great as a formative assessment after you have completed some direct teaching. So let's say that you've done a read aloud, maybe you've done an experiment, or anything that you've been teaching with students. Following that teaching, you can help them to process that learning by using a simple T-chart like this, and they can reflect on what they've just learned. So on the left side of the T-chart, we have a heading called text. And it could be a text, or it could be whatever it is that you're having them take in the information. Maybe it's a video clip or whatever it is. You give them a prompt. So you ask the students to connect with that learning with specific questions, such as, what did you learn from blank? Fill in that blank with whatever it is. And then on the right side of the chart, we label it you. And what this is you ask students to connect with what they just learned to with their own lives. So the question might look like, how does this connect to your life? And so you give them, I usually write on the board or on the anchor chart what the prompt is, or if you're teaching online, you can go ahead and type that in. And the students will reflect on that, and you can give them a sentence starter, sentence frame. We like for them to respond in writing, and I like to have them respond with a quick sketch. And then this really shows you a lot as far as what they're actually learning. And for your benefit, I put this information on the slide so that you can have that later on to go back to. Now on the right, this is called listen and sketch. You find a text that goes with your unit, maybe a poem, an excerpt of a long text, a storybook, and you mark 6 stopping points. So with a sticky note is what I usually do, or just a highlight or a line. You can highlight that stopping point, and then you ask the students to fold a piece of white paper into 6 boxes and take a pencil, and that's all that they have on their desk. You start reading the text and you stop at the stopping point to allow students to sketch the picture in their minds. So you'll say, stop, and sketch the picture in your mind. And then it's just amazing how well the students will listen and sketch out what they see in their mind's eye. And you can see that the example that I've got there is to a solar system poem. And I put the link to the poem there in the chat for you to look at when you have time. And you can see how the student was thinking about the first section. It talks about someone that's dreaming about going to space. And you can see that this student has captured that beautifully. And I'm going to let you compare those two when you have a moment. But basically, you can extend this into writing after the students have completed this listen and sketch. They can go back and look at what they sketched and extend that into a writing activity. And now I would like for Karen to tell us more about Excel.
Thanks, Laura. And so years ago, North Carolina DPI adopted Margarita Calderon's Excel model, which focuses on expediting comprehension for English learners through vocabulary, reading, and writing strategies. Research-based, this initiative has produced strong results for those who use this model with fidelity. And we don't have time in this session to go into all the components of Excel, but I wanted to give you some highlights and some additional resources for you to explore. Just as a reminder, these initiatives can be used with these new standards and language expectations in mind as you're wanting to make sure you're using research-based practices and you're looking for ideas. You've got lots of resources here. Okay, so in the next slide, we see that we've got a Padlet. If you would like to share any of this is going to be an ongoing, I think, Padlet, where if you would like to share anything that you have been able to incorporate from one of these research-based practices into new standards, we'd love to have your ideas here so that we can share it out with the field and be able to see that interpretive language arts grade 2-3 standard and how you were able to use maybe an Excel right around for that expressive modality, just to be able to build a resource for everyone in the field. So we won't take time in the interest of time right now to do that now, but I did want to let you know that that is there. And if you do by any means have some thoughts right off the top of your head, you can either click on that link or scan the QR code, and that will take you to our Padlet. And you can use that in your toolkit as well. Okay, so for our next objective, our next unpacking suitcase, we have got to reflect on our own practices.
That's right. Thanks, Karen. And I love how folks are putting their information on the chat, different ideas. Mary was talking about QTEL. I'd love to check that out for my middle and high school students. And please keep putting these, tweet them out with our hashtag. Please put them in the chat. And and just different ideas. We want to hear your thoughts and your ideas. Right now, we're going to reflect and think about your lessons. You know that most of us have quite a collection of lessons that we go to for our different grade levels and things. But some of you may be new to ESL, and you might want to connect with some folks here that maybe have a little more experience. and think about those lessons, those things you go to. And now, with this knowledge from our session, how do you apply the standards, the new ELD standards? And in the chat, what I would like for you to do is summarize your learning in just 3 words. That's going to be tough for some of us, but I want you to think deeply. What 3 words come to your mind about connecting your lessons and the standards? Okay, someone put interactive, reflective, inclusive. Yes.
Nice. Wendy said strategic, inspiring, and resourceful.
All right, Carmen's got rigor, compliance, and usable.
I like Lanny put integration, content, and language. Nice.
Yes.
Ooh, keep them coming. Look at this. Oh, these are great.
Renew, interactive, scaffold. Possible. Yes, this is possible. Productive, effective. If you're on NC Go Open, that's a great place to share these as well. All of your ideas.
I love this, Cindy. Thank you. It's more than 3 words, but sharing you're excited about what you've learned these past 2 days already and getting the students more actively involved in learning process. That I agree 100%. Thank you for sharing that. I like this possible, productive, effective. Thanks, Karen.
Keep those coming.
And we got user friendly. I like that. Collaborative and supportive. Thanks, Sylvia. Oh, here we go, Myron. Thank you. Unpack using strategies.
It's great.
Intentional, thoughtful, deliberate. Awesome. Michael, good job. That's great. I love that.
Marcita. Intentional, rigorous, empowering. Miss you, Marcita.
Yes. And so let's look and see, did we meet our objectives today as we are closing up? We've got, I'm clicking on my screen, to become acquainted with the purpose, format, contents, and location. I hope everybody can at least find those and know how to Google the resource hub. And also, we provided ideas for how to use this resource in support of implementation. And we reflected on our practices. We just did that. And we promoted research-based standards. And if you did not go into that Google Doc, that shared Google Doc, please make sure you go and at least either click that link to put it in your artifact so that you have that for your district if you're going to apply for CEUs, or just as another way to connect with that application of what you learned today. And what we would like to do then is ask you to, it's about 10 till. If you have any questions, would like to unmute, we would like you to please complete this evaluation so that we will be able to know what kind of PD you would like in the future, and also how we can make these presentations better and more usable, more practical for you, because that is our goal when we're doing these, is to make it meaningful, authentic, and relevant. More than anything else, time is precious. We value your time, and we want to make this something that you can use and will be able to use. This afternoon, we will have office hours if there was anything that we were not able to go into in depth, or if you think later of a question you'd like to have some follow-up with, you can go back to this presentation and click on this link where it says join us from 3:30 to 4:30 today, and we will be present. Or again, you can, if you're on the go, you can scan it with your QR code and join by phone. Can you think of anything else as we wrap up? I'm glad we have these couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions or to just give you a couple minutes to be able to go in and do that evaluation. We've enjoyed working with you today and